What do you want? It is not one that we frequently, or sometimes even comfortably, allow ourselves to entertain, that question, let alone answer to any degree of depth. But it is one of the most significant questions that we will ever answer, and is the question that Jesus asks as his first words in John's Gospel. We are people of desire. We long for things. We are a wanting people. It is primal to our nature to yearn. St. Augustine reflected, "The whole life of the good Christian is a holy longing. That is our life, to be trained by longing." We have been at it as a race for as long as we have been on the planet. We begin at birth with our embodied desires for breath, nourishment, warmth, and physical security. These are linked to an emotional desire for nurture that begins in childhood, extends through adulthood, and is mediated both interpersonally and neurobiologically. That is, it is felt, sensed, and acted on in our relationships with others and within our own brains. These early longings form the hard deck upon which others stand as a child matures. It doesn't take much to see the breadth of our desire. We modernists want a lot, both significant and trivial, or the depth of our desire, although the true nature of this is often outside our conscious awareness. We are told by many wise guides that this desire begins and ends with God, God's desire for us to desire unity with Him. The idea is not for us to be dissolved into God, losing ourselves, but to be united with Him so that the more connected we are to Him, the more we become distinctly ourselves. Christian anthropology reveals, perhaps somewhat counterintuitively, that the depth and intensity of our desire for and unity with God directly and proportionally mirror the degree to which we become the truest versions of our individual selves. And our scriptures bear this out. Along with expressions of praise and gratitude, which occupy their own place of prominence, we read a vast number of stories of people who desire help from God, who long for guidance, wisdom, and courage. We are a wanting people. Even the prayer Jesus gave his disciples, the Lord's Prayer, is filled with requests. Beyond hallowing the Father's name, all else is an expression of what we want as an extension of what we most deeply need. Moreover, we read in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 11, that God has set eternity in the hearts of human beings. For the Hebrews, this was not so much a comment on the feature of time as it was on the nature of the life that God lives. In essence, we are a people of desire because we have been made in the image of a God who, likewise, is a God of deep desire. Desire to live with and be known by us, even as He desires us to be known by Him. James K. A. Smith has shed important light on this, reminding us of the biblical framework within which to approach the nature of desire. Within that frame, he persuasively and constructively explores the anthropological, philosophical, and theological underpinnings of the nature and role of desire in our status as image bearers of God. Smith, much in the spirit of Augustine, invites his readers to contend with the reality that desire is innate and simultaneously is invariably formed. Desire does not exist merely as some independent phenomenon to which we respond. It is also something that, like any good gardener knows, must be pruned. It must be shaped and will be shaped by whatever practices, habits, or in Smith's language, liturgies we develop. Our lives are far more powerfully shaped by the habits we practice in our embodied actions than by what we think. For indeed, before we are thinking creatures, we are desiring and then habit-forming creatures. This is not to suggest that we are only desiring creatures and that rational processing is somehow a subordinate function of our minds, or that we are not formed by our thoughts. Far from it. If I cannot reason about the order of actions needed to change a flat tire on my car, it doesn't matter how much I desire for it to change. However, it is my desire to drive the car on 4 air-filled tires so I can meet my wife at the airport that engages my thinking brain to change the tire in the first place. Eventually, we will see how this biblical approach to desire is reflected in the interpersonal and neurobiological features we will soon be exploring. We will also examine how the work we do in vulnerable community creates space in which to participate in the work of the Spirit, who awakens us and shapes our desires as we practice for heaven, as we form habits or liturgies of relational creativity. All well and good, then, is desire. But I have to admit, this whole notion of desiring God more than anything else can be tricky for me. If my desire begins with God's loving desire for me and ends with finding its consummation in God, the road in between seems anything but straightforward or easy. This, despite my awareness that as a follower of Jesus, only God am I made to love, to desire, with all of my heart, mind, soul, and strength. Frankly, it's easy for me to desire just about anything that is pleasurable, good, or beautiful, far more than I desire God. I mean, everything else is right in front of me. I can touch it or feel it, or at least construct it in the recesses of my mind's imagined, disembodied self. If it's really true that, as Augustine wrote, my heart remains restless until it finds its rest in God, then why, oh why, do other things compete so readily for my heart's attention? Why do I long so deeply for the idealized woman, or work, or status? Why do I yearn so hungrily for food or financial security, or simply the absence of suffering or emotional pain? I'm reminded of Walker Percy's Love in the Ruins, in which we hear the words of his character, Dr. Tom Moore. I believe in God and the whole business, Moore admits, but I love women best, music and science next, whiskey next, God fourth, and my fellow man hardly at all. This can leave us, then, with questions about desire and whether or not we can trust the ones we have. No doubt, even within the context of the church, we approach the notion of desire with anxious skepticism and sometimes with a healthy dose of caution. The Church Fathers consistently acknowledged the beauty and goodness of desire, but they were not naive to the potential for desire to be bent by sin. They knew that our longing for an ever-growing relationship with God could easily be turned to desiring objects for their own sake. Instead of experiencing joy in relationship with God and others, we desire to become God and to possess others and the objects they love. Take, for example, sex. Unsurprisingly, whenever we bring the topic of desire into view, our imaginations easily wander in the direction of sex, which can be as discomforting as it is arousing, but it is certainly not irrelevant. Visual and musical artists rightly draw our attention and give expression to this part of our lives not only because of the energy surrounding it, but also because of the role it plays physically and emotionally, representing some of the most vulnerable and creative features of our human experience. And no wonder, given the placeholder sexuality is for the intersection of our desire for beauty and goodness. But for as long as humans have walked the earth, we have used sex as much for consumption and exploitation as we have for creating beauty and goodness. It is easy for our imaginations, mine not the least, and hence the rest of our lives, to atrophy, and so they have, if the ultimate endpoint of all desire is orgasm. Because, as we know, once it's over, it's over. But we don't want it to be over. We want something more, something eternal. For indeed, the beauty, energy, and vulnerability bound up and expressed in our sexuality points to something that is deeper and beyond sex itself. Hence, true desire encompasses much more than sex and sexuality, despite the direction of the cultural title movement of nearly the last 100 years. Our anxiety about desire notwithstanding, however, we cannot escape that this is how we have been created. Our trouble stems mostly from our having had so little practice exploring what our deepest longings actually are. Artistic expressions have often helped us get closer to our desires, despite our anxiety about them. From U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, to Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son, to Gabriel Axel's Babette's Feast, to the words of the New Testament, where we read that the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. In these words, we hear echoes not only of how we long for things as humans. If St. Paul is to be believed, we do so in concert with the entire material world. But along with the Bible, we can learn about desire and its proper development by looking to the field of attachment research. The development of secure attachment is enabled by a child's experience of states of mind, feeling seen, soothed, safe, and secure. We first must, literally, be seen across the entire breadth of our emotional condition. When we are in distress, we need to be comforted, to be soothed. When we are soothed, we develop a sense of safety, of confidence in our bodies and in our environment, both physically and relationally. As we will see later, however, we need to be made safe not only from outside forces, but also from self-inflicted harm, both physical and emotional. This is where limits and boundaries become significant parts of our development and the shaping of our character, not least our desires. With our caretakers, and later ourselves, offering the word no. Hence, our desire needs to be validated in the context of proper boundaries, much like how the pruning of a tree channels its growth in a direction that produces fruit in the most bountiful way and also strengthens the life of the tree itself, all of which reflects the state of affairs in Eden at the conclusion of Genesis chapter 2. These three needs, to be seen, soothed, and safe, make way for the fourth, to be secure, collectively referred to here as the 4 S's. Security is about being able, in the face of feeling seen, soothed, and safe, to move away from our relational base and step out to take the risk of new adventure, whether that's across the crib, across the room, or across the country. It means we are willing to try new things and make mistakes, even difficult ones, because we know we have a place to return to where we will once again be seen, soothed, and safe. It is significant to realize that the 4 S's, although they develop in early childhood, are necessary for growth and integration throughout our lives. Our deep desire to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure never stops. The only question is who is providing those experiences for us. As Aaron and so many others have discovered, to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure are necessary states of mind in our discovery of desire and in the setting of limits that channel desire into patterns of beauty and goodness. But the unhealed tracks of our soul's landscape, those that still wait to experience one or more of the 4 S's, distract us from or blind us to our longing. Our desire can become muted under the fear of relational affliction or misdirected in our attempt to cope with the pain of trauma. We do not nullify desire, we merely regulate it. We may try to redirect its course or seek to contain it, but we cannot extinguish it. For God has made us with desire for connection that ultimately leads to the co-creation of objects of goodness and beauty with Him and others with whom we have difference, be it great or small. This is as powerful and inevitable as gravity, or the pull of the tides. We cannot overcome it, but in our pain that often leads to avoiding desire, or in our haste to cope with unmet desire through an infinite array of addictions, we ultimately find ourselves in places of great desolation. And then, in my office, where so many believe that they are coming to solve their problems. But what they soon discover, as will you, is that they are only beginning to create beauty and goodness in their lives.